Da 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 da! BPNC After Dawn News! Da da!
Hello, and welcome to the 7 o'clock BPNC After Dawn News. I am George Bryant, and today is April 20th, 1961. In tonight's news, we will be talking about how Alan Shepard is preparing for space travel, and how the Iron Curtains are not bronze. But now, there's breaking news in Cuba.
BPNC After Dawn News brings you the latest from Bay of Pigs.
This all started 2 years ago in 1959. Fidel Castro came to power in an armed revolt that overthrew the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. The U.S., fearing that Castro would support Nikita Khrushchev, the current leader of the Soviet Union, decided that it would be better if Castro was removed. The ultimate goal was to overthrow Castro and the establishment of a non-communist government. The original invasion plan called for 2 airstrikes against Cuban air bases, along with a ground invasion attack. The plan was to set up a provisional government. Unfortunately, the first mishap occurred 5 days ago on April 15th when 8 bombers left Nicaragua to bomb Cuban airfields. The CIA had used obsolete World War II B-26 bombers and painted them to look like Cuban Air Force planes. The bombers missed many of their targets and left most of Castro's Air Force intact. As news broke out, photos of the repainted U.S. planes became public and revealed American support for the invasion. President Kennedy was forced to cancel a second airstrike. A live eyewitness from Cuba.
Thanks, George. We are our eyewitness, Mateo. When did you go into the Navy?
1956.
You normally didn't go to the Caribbean?
No, they had another squadron of destroyers there in Mayport, Florida. They usually cover that area.
The captain told you there was going to be a war with Cuba?
Well, the captain told us there was going to be a conflict, and there was going to be real, but it was just going to be a shooting war. The Cuban people were uprising, he said, and they were going to overthrow the Cuban government. We were just going there to support them. And there were Cuban brigades that were going to start a provisional government. And this, for us, was real.
So your ship had no official U.S. Navy insignia on it?
It was a civilian ship, but it was actually part of this naval armada that we were using.
So the invasion was done in disguise?
Yes, we weren't allowed to radio things in English to other soldiers.
How many individuals did your men face?
Well, there was 400 or 500 of them that hit that beach with their equipment. When they went across into the beach, there were these scrubby hills. They went onto the beach and started going up the hills. Some of them got up there, and some of them stopped to make a radio transmission. Then, up at the top of the hill, there were various forces with tanks, and they were just started shooting down the beach with their cannon.
The Cuban army, presumably?
As far as anyone knows. It was Cubans. Who else could it be? Anyway, you could see the artillery hitting the beach. Great clouds would go up, and Cubans were running all over the place trying to get up the hills. Their equipment was all on the beach and got shot up. And that transport ship, they got hit with the artillery round. It was a big black puff of smoke, and a lot of their equipment was, destroyed in there. I knew it was there because I was on the bridge and I heard the officers talking. Captain said they wouldn't be able to get their heavy equipment off. They had been ferrying back and forth, picking up soldiers and stuff because they didn't have that many boats. We made 2 or 3 passes up and down the beach. One time it was real close. Then I saw them. Some of them were laying on the beach, and I saw one artillery round come down. And I didn't know. I don't know, maybe it's my imagination, but I swear I saw several people flying through the air. Then a couple of their micro boats got shot up with shrapnel and close hits. And it was pretty heavy. We went back in open water, and then the task group wasn't there anymore. So we joined up with the rest of our squadron and went back into the base.
Thank you, Mateo. And now back to you, George, at BPNC.
We now take you to Professor Geisner at the University of Maryland, the expert on Cuban relations. We're here in Maryland with Professor Geisner to talk about Cuban relations. Geisner?
Well, George, the document received read, "If matters do not eventuate as predicted above, the legend established by the U.S. and other American states and be given over military intervention and the pacification of Cuba, this will result in the prompt overthrow of the Castro government. So even in that time, in January, I visualized the possibility of a provisional government in the Escambray Mountain area, which would at the time be assisted by the U.S. It was essential to overthrow Castro. I thoroughly believed in that objective.
So, Kennedy defeated Vice President Nixon in November 1960. Where did that leave preparation for Cuban operations?
Well, I really thought that what we were doing should stop Castro and his supporters for good. We should have gotten rid of that communist regime. I was sure that the national government meant what it said when it said, "We want to overthrow Castro." Now, of course, we had to change administration when Kennedy was elected, and that changed things considerably.
So, were you ever involved with any direct briefings for President Kennedy?
As a matter of fact, I did. I reported to the Marine commandant in his office, General David Shoup, and he said the CIA wants to land a few Cuban exile troops in Cuba. They have asked for a Marine colonel to give them some help on this.
Pleased to welcome Alan Trevors, political expert, to discuss the aftermath of Bay of Pigs.
Well, thank you, George.
Well,
Welcome, Alan.
historically, the United States sponsored the invasion of Cuba. It has been referred to as a poorly planned, poorly executed fiasco. As a result of this botched maneuver to bring democracy to Cuba, John F. Kennedy was served his first military and political blunder as commander-in-chief. And the foreign policy of the United States veered towards a new dangerous direction. Thank you, George. Well, thank you, Alan. Well, that's all for us. Back after a short message from our sponsors. When you want a meal for your family, you don't say ham, you say spam. That's the news. Spam, 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 spam,